Hey guys, this video is going to address a specific topic that we've been asked about a lot the last few days, but we're also going to use this video to give to people in the future in relation to other similar topics. Now, we addressed this on our last Myths in Japan video, on the Myths in Japan playlist, and what's happened recently that's triggered this has been people talking about in Japan it's been a trend. This is what it's a trend that people are licking each other's eyeballs, right? Now, we're making this video to address that particular topic, but if you've been sent this video or referred to this video, it's because we get this all the time. And what happens is, as we mentioned in the last Myths video, is that you get some small weird thing. Now, when you've got 127 million people living in a country, if you get a few thousand of them do some weird thing, then it's only a small percentage. It's a point something 1% of the population. It's a very small percentage of a small group of the population doing some bizarre thing. But when it gets picked up by the media run with it, because the showing weird stuff in Japan thing is a real popular thing for media to do around the world for some strange reason. The reality is that any country with a big population has people doing weird shit in it. But for some reason, when it happens in Japan, it gets picked up on and reported in a way that gives the impression that it's mainstream. And they'll use words like trend. It's a trend in Japan for people to lick each other's eyeballs. There's things like that. And it's not. You know, they'll write, oh, it's a bizarre trend. You know, this new bizarre trend in Japan. The latest bizarre trend from Japan is people are licking each other's eyeballs. It's not a trend. If it was a trend, it would be the thing that those of us that are living here would see it. And we don't. Because it's not a trend. It's a small number of people in a huge society that are doing this weird thing. So I'll expand on the eyeball thing, but please, whatever topic it is that you've asked us about, because we're going to send this video to people in the future, because this always happens every few months. There's a new one that the media, usually what happens, I think, is someone picks up one on the internet, makes a video about it on YouTube, or they report it. It happens, a lot of the YouTube people do this. They pick up some bizarre thing and they report it, and it can give the impression that it's mainstream, and then the mainstream media pick up on it and they put it at the end of their news story, you know, so you get big, you know, BBC or some big television group in another country at the end of their news say, and a quick funny one from Japan, you know, the latest trend in Japan is licking each other's eyeballs. Or the latest trend in Japan, the last one that we dealt with, was injecting saline into foreheads and making a bagel shape. There's some people here doing that, you know, and every time we get one of these, we get all these messages from people saying, tell us about that, what's going on with that trend, tell us about that trend. And it's just ridiculous, because every country in the world has people doing bizarre stuff. But when that's reported, it's reported as, oh, these two guys were caught in a barn having sex with a donkey. It's not reported that the latest trend in America is having sex with donkeys. It's not reported like that. It's reported as an anomaly, as some strange thing that some strange dudes have done. But when some strange people in Japan do some shit, it's the latest weird trend from Japan. And it just becomes a bit tiresome after a while. I mean, we addressed it in the last Myths video a couple of weeks ago, and here we are again with it coming up again, where, you know, it's sort of being asked as if it's like a mainstream thing. It's just not. First time I heard about eyeball licking was over 20 years ago in a drug awareness training course related to law enforcement, and it was related to ecstasy, and they're talking about some of the behaviours of people who take ecstasy, and it listed a whole heap of weird stuff that people on ecstasy are likely to do or have done, or, you know, sort of examples of weird stuff that ecstasy people might do. And it was talking about, because, you know, ecstasy gives a heightened sense of the senses, and one of the things on that list was people licking each other's eyeballs. And that was over 20 years ago in Australia. And that wasn't reported around the world, that the latest trend from Australia was people licking each other's eyeballs. It wasn't reported, of course. You know, it wasn't reported that it was mainstream trend or anything like that. It was just some weird stuff that some ecstasy people were doing. So, you know, I think in all our own countries we know, now and again you get some weird story in our own country in the newspaper about some weird group, you know, group of 20 people at a party doing some weird thing, or group of 20 people in a park somewhere doing some weird thing, or, you know, there's weird people around the world doing weird stuff, you know. But when it gets reported in most of our countries, it's reported as an unusual thing. But when other countries report on it happening in Japan, they report these things like they're mainstream. And they're just not. They're just not. Out of all these weird things that keep getting reported, most of us have never seen it in Japan. And a lot of it either barely gets a mention in the media or doesn't get mentioned at all, because in perspective we know. It's the same as in a lot of other countries. You have those weird newspapers and weird magazines that are sort of tabloids, you know, that like to report the weird stuff in our own countries, you know, and oh, you know, this bizarre group of people that were doing weird stuff with yogurt and plastic, or, you know, some weird sexual or some weird stuff, and those sort of cheap, trashy tabloids report it. And it's like the same thing here. It's the same thing here. When the bagel thing, the eyeball licking thing, all these things come up, it doesn't get a mention in the mainstream media. The only mention that came out about the eyeball thing was there was a small mention about it because of a health issue, because of the health issue with it, you know, being dangerous. It's not a healthy thing to do. So the reason for this video is, okay, first of all, to address the eyeball thing. Look, it is happening, you know, I think what happens is with this sort of stuff is once it gets reported, then people get curious, and you know, kids and other people that wouldn't have even thought of licking someone's eyeball, when it gets reported, they get curious. The same as after people have seen this video, they'll get curious. You know, what's it feel like to have your eyeball licked, you know? So it's just bizarre. It's just bizarre. So it's a really small percentage of the people, it wouldn't even be 1%, it'd be a 0.00 something of a percent of the people that are doing this weird thing. It's not a trend. It's not a trend. You can't call something a trend. So in relation to the eyeball thing, yes, there's some weird people in Japan licking eyeballs. There's also some weird people in Australia licking eyeballs. And I would suggest probably every country in the world has a small percentage of weirdos that lick eyeballs. It's just the same as the other stuff. It's the same as all the other stuff. So next time you see some weird thing reported from Japan, just let's try and keep it in perspective. It's hard to understand why it gets reported like this. It's sort of like it's become fashionable to suggest that Japan's weird, and Japan is weird. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on here, but the mainstream Japan is just not that weird. It's just, you know, life in Japan. You don't see these things in mainstream Japan. You have to go to the weird parts of Tokyo or the weird parts of the big city to come across the weird people. And, you know, anybody that's ever been to New York or London or any of the major big cities of the world, Sydney, Australia, has seen weird shit. You know, there's a small percentage of weird people in every country of the world. So, you know, it's the same here. You won't, if you come to Japan expecting to see weird stuff, you know, you're going to be disappointed. It's no more common to see it on the street than it is in any of the other major capital cities of the world. So, you know, just take it with a grain of salt when you read these stories or when you see these stories on the internet. I mean, they're almost always true. They're almost always true, but what isn't true is the fact that they call these things trends. It's the latest weird trend from Japan. It's not true. It's not accurate. If there's 127 million people and there's only a few hundred or a few thousand people doing something, even 100,000 people doing something, you still can't call it a trend, because it's not, is it? It's not. If there's only 100,000 people doing it and there's 127 million people living here, you can't call it a trend. No more than we can call the weird stuff that's going on in other countries all around the world. You know, unless there's a high percentage of people doing it, unless you can walk down the street and see it, then it's not really right to call it a trend, is it? And we're not seeing this stuff here. We don't see it. We don't see it, you know. Often what happens is media come here. I've seen this before, is that media, you know, there's a small media group called Journeyman, and there's some other, You know, there was the guys with the car thing from the UK, the car show from the UK, and they come here and they sort of expect to find weird stuff, and they go looking for weird stuff, and then they report it. And because they don't really know, they've come here to do a story on the place, they find some weird stuff, and they report it, and they don't know it's not mainstream, and they report it and make it sound like it's normal or it's a trend. You know, it's oh, Japanese people do this. Japanese people lick each other's eyeballs. And they report it like it's mainstream. So, yeah, it's best to keep an open mind and a critical mind when you read these stories about Japan. Almost always they are true, in that these things are happening, but what's usually not true is it's usually not a trend. It's usually just a small percentage, the same as it is in all our other countries where there's weird stuff going on all around us, you know. And it's sort of it's sort of annoying when you live here to keep hearing these things is annoying, and it's sort of annoying because it's false. It'd be the same as if we were saying these weird things about the countries that you guys come from. You know, oh, you come from that country. Oh, that country. Yeah, I've heard you guys have sex with donkeys. You know, because there was some guys that had sex with donkeys in that country, or some other bizarre stuff like that. So. Oh, ridiculous. Anyway, there it is. The answer is, it's not a trend. The answer is, it's not a trend. Whatever it is you've asked us about, the eyeball licking or whatever bizarre trend has come after the eyeball licking. You know, this is June 2013. No doubt we are still using this video 1 year later to say, no, whatever it is you asked us about is not a trend. It was just a small number of people that were doing it, and it got falsely reported as a trend. And no, we haven't seen it. That's the other thing. We haven't seen it. We've probably heard about it from the same sources that you have, but it's not true. It's not a trend. It happened, but it's not a trend, and we haven't seen it. More videos coming soon.